Chapter 4. Mine Eyes. Before she could further protest, Juliana found herself being funnelled along in a straggly line of about 20 children across the same stone-flagged courtyard that she walked through last night. In the light of day she now noticed there were many buildings arranged untidily around this central courtyard. They all seemed to be in a shambolic huddle of black, steeply pitched roofs, pepper-pot-shaped pinnacles intersected by narrow cobblestone lanes. Some of the buildings tilted rakishly to one side. Time and neglect had obviously done their work on these dwellings. There also appeared to be lots of stairs, leading nowhere. At first blush it reminded Juliana of that black-and-white sketch she had once seen of the never-ending staircase. As for the courtyard, it was bounded by desiccating Doric columns, and in the middle of the square stood an equally old, dry fountain. A prancing marble unicorn reared up in the waterless fountain, its proud horn pointed skyward. Juliana thought it would have looked rather lovely in its day. "It's quite a big area you've got here," she observed. "Yes, on a clear day you can see, well, I forget where. But there's a lot of disused buildings and empty land hereabouts. But you'd know that," he added charily. Beyond the courtyard, to the left, lay a gravel path which they followed. This eventually opened out onto a kind of knoll. Just then Wardlow stopped. With the ominous-looking pointy end of the blunderbuss, he motioned the children down into what seemed to be a hole in the ground. One by one, each child disappeared down the cavity. "What's down there?" she asked Richard warily. "Mines," he replied simply. "Our shift." "Oh, I'll give you sharp shift all right. I'll be blowed if I'm going down there into some stinking salt pit. All this, it's ridiculous. Just get me a phone," she shouted. The thought that this was not a novelty kid's birthday bash after all was faint at first, but it grew stronger every minute. Something's not right here. For one thing, look at their clothes. They're disgusting, she thought, with heartfelt distaste. And she was right. Boys and girls alike all wore a shabby grey tunic, or if she was going to be impolite, a grain sack. Some decided to be a little more haute couture and tied a rope fetchingly around their waists. Most little feet were unshod. Some had a crude likeness of moccasins protecting theirs. They all looked roughly her age, 12, some younger, some older, but none older than, she guessed, about 16. Then she looked down at her own clothes. Instead of seeing her blue jeans, red-checked shirt, green jacket, and crisp white canvas shoes, she saw, to her utter horror, that she too was wearing the same grizzled tunic as everyone else. "Someone must have come and changed my clothes while I slept," she thought. "Ugh! Who? So where were her old clothes now? Oh, this is impossible. Maybe it was one of those weird cults she stumbled into, where they used children as slave labour." Before she could conjecture any further, Richard had vanished down the crater. Now she stood, hesitating on the threshold. "Don't dawdle there, little maidie," Wardlow said, pointing the blunderbuss at her. Trying to stall for time until she could find a way of escape, she tried a line that had worked with her music teacher for much the same reason. "Ah, Mr. Wardlow," she said, with as much cheerfulness as she could muster. "What note do you hear when you drop a piano down a mine shaft?" She paused. "A flat minor! Boom, boom!" she said, almost slapping him on the back in a blithe spirit of bonhomie. He stared at her blankly. "No gabbing, little maidie. You know them targets have got to be met, or her ladyship'll be none too pleased. And if you're not all down there working by 8:30,
It'll be my head on the chopping block. So, off you go, then."
He pushed her towards the mouth of the crevice, and she descended into the crack of the earth. Following the procession down towards goodness knows where, she saw the top of Richard's head, and noted that he was climbing down the rungs of an iron ladder, secured against the wall of the earth. She groped each rung, and made her own way unsteadily down into the dark innards of the mountain. Rubble and loose stones dislodged, anointing her head with their gravelly baptism. Finally, as she reached the bottom of the ladder, she came into a dimly lit chamber. The eerie light that was yellow, cast from the lanterns, revealed large beams of timber bracing the walls and ceiling. Another guard with a bayonet stood at the entrance of this subterranean cavern.
"Right. The Queen wants more of that green malachite. So today you best be on the lookout for any green vein of the stuff, or there'll be hell to pay," the guard added darkly. "As you know, just throw the pickings in the skip. Each of you will take a sack full up to the surface at the end of the shift, as usual, and others will sift through it and see if there be any green malachite there for her Grand Duchess. You can talk quietly among yourselves, but if I see any slacking, you'll feel the steel of my knife. So get to work, and no shilly-shallying, see?"
The children, including Juliana, got to work. The airless room was hot and heavy with the unmistakable smell of gas, methane probably. In a corner of the room was the eggshell-thin corpse of a once-breathing canary. She felt herself swallow dust, inhale dust, and generally get covered in the stuff. Every now and then, dust burned her eyes with pain. But as she hacked away at the subterranean rock, without any idea why or what she was looking for, she struck up a conversation with Richard, who worked beside her. Deciding that the wisest strategy was not to draw undue attention to herself, while that Bolshevik guard and his gleaming weapon were standing not 3 meters from her, she simply made small talk. "Thirsty work, this," was her opening gambit. "Pit work is." He paused. "The pits?" she suggested. "Suffocating. What I wouldn't give to see a bit of sky," he said wistfully. "Yes," she agreed. "Sorry, I'm kind of new here. What am I supposed to be digging for exactly?" she asked. "Yes, now that you come to mention it, I haven't seen you here before. But then there's always new ones coming in, when their parents die, that is," he said softly. "Oh, so you're all orphans," she said, light dawning. "Didn't they tell you? The cowshed is where you come if both your parents die," he said. "No, they didn't," she said, sparring warily for time. "They always use us orphans for the pit work, because we're small, see? And there's no mothers to object. We can squeeze down that shaft easier than a grown-up, and we can crawl through the lower tunnels down there." He pointed in the direction of a low archway leading to a dark and unknown tunnel beyond. "Tunnel rats, some call us," he grinned raffishly. "And we're looking for a shiny green line in the rock," he continued. "The Queen has taken a real liking to green malachite, so we have to hew more and more out of the mine. They say she makes jewels and even tables out of it," he said. The stale air hung like soup in the pale light about them. The sound of pickaxes chinking into the rock continued. Juliana wondered what sort of queen would exploit small children, and weren't there any child protection laws, or at least some decent occupational health and safety rules around here? Taking a different tack, she asked as sensitively as she could, "And when did you first come here?" "Oh,
I've been living in the cowshed for 7 years now. My parents died when I was just 4, so they tell me. I don't remember them. But they say my mother was a beauty," he said with a touch of pride. "But don't you all hate it? I mean, sleeping in that nasty barn? Oh, there's no privacy." "It must be very badly funded, as there aren't even any proper beds. The food is really gross. I can't believe there hasn't been a government inquiry into it," she said incredulously, hacking away. "Well, some of the little ones say that it's better here than when they lived at home, because the Yorp doesn't come into the cowshed," he said. Not knowing quite what to say to this, Juliana said that she had not yet had the pleasure of meeting the Yorp. Richard said nor had he, because the Yorp didn't like open spaces, so it seemed. "My friend Beethan says when he used to live at home with his parents, he had his own bedroom, see? And it terrified him, because the Yorp used to come into his room some nights. He says it starts off real small, about the size of your fist, but then it grows and grows like a big pig's head, only whiter, and it fills the whole room. Beethan says its black mouth just yorps open until you feel like you're going to be sucked into it forever. Then it goes away. Poof!" "How awful," she said. She was a skeptic where the paranormal was concerned, but she felt she should make allowances under the circumstances. "Yes, I have the odd nightmare too," she blushed at the recollection. "But they usually involve normal things like falling off from the top of a revolving ceiling fan or showing up at school in your pyjamas." Just then a blood-curdling scream broke out. "Ah! Rats! I saw rats! 2 of them!" came the cry. Everyone turned to look at a small hysterical girl who was the harbinger of such bad news. What seems to be the matter?" said the guard. "I don't see no rats, girl. Just forget about 'em and get back to work," he said brusquely. The girl, sniffing and somewhat mollified, but still sceptical, returned to her toil. "I wish," mused Richard philosophically, "that green malachite would grow wings and fly." "Then it could move itself," he said. "There is that," agreed Juliana. After what seemed like 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth, but was actually only about 9 hours, they were allowed up to the top of the earth again. Each child hauled their own little sack of rocks onto their backs and once again climbed the iron ladder. As Juliana emerged, blinking in the sunlight and drinking in the cool, fresh air, she was aware of a feeling of terrible thirst. After each dusty little figure plopped their haul into a skip at the surface of the mine, they scooped up water from a nearby trough with a wooden cup. Juliana drank a long draught deeply. It was so good to finally quench her fiery thirst that she did not mind the slightly metallic taste of that grubby water. Richard's hair looked prematurely grey from all the dust. She shuddered to think what hers must look like. A grey twilight had settled, and the blunderbuss and its owner Wardlow once again ushered the children back to the cowshed. They ate more black bread and swilled down their green grog. Unused to enduring the gruelling labour of a muscle-bound 70-kilo weightlifter, Juliana felt exhausted. As soon as she had finished her simple meal, she collapsed onto the little canvas straw-covered pallet. In spite of her fatigue, this strange day's work reminded her of a song her brother Tristan had written for his philosophy class musical, The Phantom of Philosophy. She recalled that Tristan's friend Egbert had sung it in a throaty baritone to the tune of the Gilbert and Sullivan song, I am the very model of a modern Major General. My name is Albert Camus, and I wrote the myth of Sisyphus, unfortunately named, but that's no reason for dismissiveness.
I pushed a boulder up a hill, it fell to cosmic nothingness. Can't see the point of anything, I'm another dismal nihilist. I am the very model of a modern existentialist. Humming this little dirge to herself, like a weary Winnie the Pooh, Juliana told herself that tomorrow she would go and find someone in authority around here. Someone, she thought, as she fell into the arms of Morpheus, with whom she could make her situation clear, and who would take steps to get her home. At the thought of home, tears welled up and spilled over onto the rough pillow. How she missed her own soft, friendly sheets and blankets. How she longed to feel clean and soft after a refreshing shower. And a drink of nice, hot, sweet tea. Tomorrow, she would get home somehow. Aching, sobbing, and body tired, she fell asleep.